Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Kateryna Schray, and our program producer, Professor Larry Schray. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guests. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Kateryna Schray.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Kateryna. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. And today's guest is the same, Dr. Kateryna Schray, who just did the Ukrainian greeting, and she is our dear colleague and co-host of MUkraine for 184th week of this program. Dr. Schray will talk about her father, Dr. Leonid Rudnytzky, in honor of his 90th birthday, with memories from around the world. Please, Kateryna.
Wow. I'm very, very grateful to my friends at MUkraine for dedicating this week's and next week's programs to the memory of my father, Professor Dr. Leonid Rudnytzky. Professor Rudnytzky knew his purpose in life with unwavering clarity. He was a steadfast champion of the persecuted Ukrainian Catholic Church, a tireless advocate for religious and human rights in Ukraine, and a devoted guardian of Ukrainian culture in the diaspora. And he carried this calling with conviction, never shying away from the sacrifices it demanded. Over his 60-year career, Professor Rudnytzky advised many politicians, several presidents, and one pope, as well as other world leaders, religious leaders, business leaders, and he contributed to many high-level talks, meetings, conferences in matters of scholarship, church, politics, and human and religious rights, especially human and religious rights. He was a relentless advocate for the persecuted and a consistent champion for the oppressed. So this week's program will offer a brief biography, quickly survey his scholarship, and then focus at length on his most important legacy, that of a teacher, and then we'll hear from some of his former students. I'm going to do this terrifying thing of sharing my screen, and we'll get started. All right, so opening slide, there he is. This is a portrait that he especially liked of himself. Leonid Rudnytzky was born on September 8th, 1935 in Lviv, Ukraine. Circled here is Lviv, the western part of Ukraine, a very familiar city to us on our program. We've sent support there, as well as to Ternopil, which is where his family came from. His family is connected to the village of Augustiniuka, which was in the Berezhany district of the Ternopil region. And so very much here in western Ukraine, away from much of the horror happening today, but still that area is still very much affected. Here are the earliest photos we have of him, taken in 1936, when he is a little under a year old, along with his mother, Yulia, who's there in the far left side. And here he is with his parents in 1940, and this is still in Lviv. And then here he is with his grandparents, also in Lviv, and this is in 1942. And so you have him here, the little boy in between. Leonid came from a family of priests. His father, Ivan Theodor Rudnytsky, departed from this tradition and became a lawyer and eventually a co-organizer of the November uprising in Lviv in 1918. During the German occupation, as an attorney, Ivan Theodor managed to free Ukrainian families from prison, and he did what he could to defend his Jewish neighbors. My father often recalled the story of a little girl, a pretend sister, who lived with him for several months, and she was never allowed to go near the windows. And as a child, he didn't fully understand what was happening. Actually, they fought over a toy once, and to his dying day, he felt bad about that, not understanding why she was there. And the rest of his life, he kept her in his prayers, wondering what happens to her. We don't know what happened to her. The hopelessness of the Second World War forced the family to leave their homeland in 1944 when Leonid was 9 years old. And they made their way westward over the Carpathian Mountains. At that point, his father fell ill with pneumonia, and he never recovered from that. But here they are in 1948 in Bielefeld, Germany, where they were displaced persons. They were in a displaced persons camp. In March of 1951, when Leonid was 16 years old, Ivan Theodor passed away, and he was buried in Hexter on the Weser River. And for the family, as you can imagine, for any family, the loss of a parent at that age is an incredible loss, an irreparable loss. So in January of 1952, Leonid and his mother arrived in America. And this is important here because he understood what it meant to be a refugee at the mercy of others, what it meant to be a 16-year-old in a new country, learning a new language and adapting to a new life with his widowed mother. And throughout his life, he went on to advocate and care for others experiencing these difficulties. In fact, one of his former students talks about how he as a professor, would urge the successful students in the immigrant community to tutor the newcomer immigrants because he understood what it would take to help catch them up on their education. There was a generation that was essentially lost out on 4 or 5 valuable years of education. So here he is in 1954. Actually, he's in Philadelphia in this one. Sorry about this. I'm having a there we go. Here he is. Here he is in 1953 with his mother. They are now safely in Philadelphia. And here he is in 1954. This is a yearbook photo from his high school graduation. And during high school, he worked as a landscaper. He said he worked for a gardener, but I think now what he really meant was he worked for a landscaper. It was physically very hard work in the hot sun, but he enjoyed it. He was a strong young man, and he earned much more than his mother did. His mother worked in a factory sewing collars onto girls' dresses, as is the case with almost every immigrant family. You came and you found whatever work you possibly could. My other grandmother, for example, cleaned floors in the hospital. And so he out-earned his mother by working as a landscaper. And so after he finished high school, he was there for about a year and a half. He was fully ready to go to work for the landscaper and maintain the family that way. But his mother wouldn't hear of it. She cited the family's value of education and was just appalled at the thought of him not going to university. So he enrolled in LaSalle College, which is now LaSalle University. And that's actually the touch point for our 3 guests that are going to join us in just a little bit, well, for 2 of the guests at least, and also for the 3rd. He graduated in 1957, and I don't have a photo of his college graduation. I suspect they just couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford to purchase one. But I do have a photo of him after he earned his master's degree. And this is in the University of Pennsylvania in 1960. And I kind of love this look. I'm not sure what to do with that expression. He looks a lot like my nephew. And it's a very sweet look. He had to be like 23 in this photo. So in the University of Pennsylvania, the best thing possible happened to him when he met his wife, my mother. But the same year he graduated from Penn, he began teaching at his alma mater, LaSalle. And in the following year, he began his doctoral studies at the Ukrainian Free University in Munich, which he completed in 1965. So back to the best thing that happened to him. At Penn, he met his wife, Irene Leonid Rudnytzky. And here they are. The story goes that he was sitting behind her in class. She thought he was an arrogant jerk. She wasn't completely wrong. Sometimes he could be a little bit arrogant. He was way too confident about himself. He was trying to flirt, but I'm sure he thought he was doing great. I don't think she thought he was doing great. But they met in a class. They were both TAing for a German class, and from there on, eventually fell in love. Here they are on their wedding day, and here they are on their 50th anniversary. He passed away 17 days before their 60th anniversary. He was always very vocally grateful for his wife and her unyielding support of his work and their marriage, which was filled with joy, strength, and an unshakable faith in one another. He was devoted to her, and she was to him. They met when they were both graduate students at the University of Pennsylvania, married in 1964. And what was unusual for Americans, but not at all unusual for immigrants, is they moved both of their widowed mothers into the home with them. So I grew up in a home with a mother, father, and two babchas. Which now, as an adult myself, married with kids, this is hard to imagine, having both my mother and mother-in-law live with us. But they did it, and it was a beautiful, happy household, not without its struggles, but they took care of their mothers, their widowed mothers, for the rest of their lives. They went on to raise 3 children, me included. They opened their home to many students from Ukraine, who had nowhere else to live. Do you guys hear an echo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening there. They lived modestly so they could help others. Oh, okay, so I'm going to need somebody other than me to fix this technical glitch. It sounds like someone has their an additional microphone on. Leonid fully understood and appreciated his wife's role in his success, and he never lost sight of her as his true north. And together they shared an intellectual excellence and a deep and unwavering faith. And so here is a photo of the recently married Leonid Rudnytzky, and with some of his absolute core family. So probably the two figures, well, the man seated beneath him is the playwright and church historian Honorary Lushnycky. And after my father's father died, he became Leo Rudnytzky's mentor, father figure. Standing next to him is between them, there's a beautiful young woman, but next to him, on the other side of the young woman, is his cousin, who honestly is really his brother. Leonid Rudnytzky was an only child, and had it not been for his cousins Alexander and Kateryna Lushnycky, his life would have been so much lonely. And so Alexander Lushnycky, who's a major figure in the Ukrainian American community in Philadelphia and beyond, and a prolific author, was his cousin, but really, honestly, more like a brother to him. The woman between them is Alexander's soon-to-be wife, Maria, and Mary. And beneath them, we have his uncle's wife, so his aunt, and that is the actress Nina Konashinska, the Ukrainian actress. Then we have his mother-in-law, Nadezhda Yevins. Then we have his uncle, and then we have next to his uncle on the far right-hand side, his mother, Yulia, now in Philadelphia, living in among other Ukrainian American immigrants. So Leonid was very active in the Ukrainian American community and also in the Ukrainian diaspora across the world. And here we have screen grabs from 2 of his television appearances in Philadelphia. This was a time when no one really knew where Ukraine was, what a Ukrainian was, or anything like that. And so here we have an appearance in 1979. He is on a local program talking about Ukrainian Christmas traditions. And there he is in a program talking about Easter traditions some years later. And we'll actually revisit this photo next week, because one of the people in the photo will be one of our guests. So he supported and promoted the Ukrainian identity, advocated for Ukraine, not just through media appearances, but largely through his scholarship. Cast from his native view to Germany and then to the United States, he mastered 3 languages, and after receiving education, he worked among those 3 cultures. He devoted his entire life to promoting Ukrainian literature as a vital part of world literature. He published over 300 works, many of which focused on the Christian motifs in the works of Taras Shevchenko, Ivan Franko, and others. And through translations, anthologies, and academic studies, he made lasting contributions to the global understanding of Ukraine's literary heritage, emphasizing its relevance, moral depth, aesthetic richness, and deep spirituality. And he was particularly interested in fostering connections between the diaspora and Ukraine. He advocated tirelessly for the recognition of Ukrainian literature, believing that literature had a redemptive ethical mission and that it could transform the historical suffering of the Ukrainian people into moral and spiritual strength. He was very blessed to receive a lot of recognitions over the course of his life, and here are some of those recognitions. But the thing that mattered by far the most to him in his professional life was his teaching. So while LaSalle University served as his academic home, He also taught at numerous universities on 4 different continents. He taught thousands of students, many of whom are in local leadership roles in Ukraine and throughout the world today. And he was very well aware that his greatest professional legacy was his students. And we're going to actually hear from some of those students today. Here's some of his his teaching positions. So we're going to hear from some of those students today. And we're going to joining us this week are novelist Alex Opanasiuk from Ukraine, Honorary Consul of Ukraine and Switzerland Andrej Lushnycky, and Salle University Professor of Political Science Mark Thomas. And gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome you to our program. We're going to start with Alex Opanasiuk, and before I stop sharing, and I'm going to show one more picture, and then I'm going to stop the sharing, and we'll start talking. So this is young Alex Opanasiuk, and he is crowning Leo Rudnytzky with the crown of leaves on the occasion of his 75th birthday. And you can see the crowd all around and like happy smiles. This was a wonderful, incredibly thoughtful thing for a student to do. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and introduce Alex Opanasiuk. He's a novelist with a background in journalism and a law degree. And until very recently, and he'll share a little bit about this, he and his family lived in Kiev. Alex, thank you for being here. Before we talk about Leo Rudnytzky, please tell us a little bit about what life is like for you right now, you and your family in Ukraine. Oh, mute it. We all do that. We all get muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, we stayed in Kiev throughout the war, but only recently we decided to go south a little bit because the 2 last bombardments were a little too intense, even for my taste. So it was pretty brutal, and there was a building that collapsed not far from us, and we have a 2-year-old kid, and he finally, develops interest in what's going on there, and he would ask, when the siren would go off, he would say, "Is that a ballistic missile or a cruise missile?"
Oh my God, 2 years old.
Yeah, right. So we decided to, at least for a while, we decided to move down here. It's a very nice little town called Korsun. It's about 150 kilometers south of Kiev. It's very historic. I mean, the place is very picturesque. It's very relaxed, laid back. It's a lot more safe here. So that's why we decided to take a little break from the capital city. I mean, and that's the thing. Not too many people talk about it. That's how a completely peaceful life could coincide with a brutal war. Like nothing much is happening in Kiev, for a week, and then all of a sudden you have dozens of victims to a nightly raid and so forth. It's almost like it's an absurd situation to an extent. I first noticed it quite a while ago. I used to write for this newspaper. It's called Day. It's one of the major papers. And back, I believe, in 2015 or 2016, they sent me to the front lines to write about the 72nd Brigade at the time. And that was my first impression of this absurdity. Like in Kiev, you board this almost futuristic looking train, this modern piece of machinery. You go in, everything is hushed, everything is high tech. You see people, typing their laptops. There would be a few military personnel, of course. And then the train used to go to Donetsk, and of course, after the occupation, I think the last stop was Kostiantynivka. That's a little town that's been heavily bombarded now. And then the door opens up. Welcome to the war, right? And that was a little bit, and we have a lot more of that in Kiev now. As I say, life would go on, and then all of a sudden there would be a major attack. And in the morning, you would see this smoke everywhere. There would be, quite a few people dead by the early hours. And then everybody goes to work as if not much happened. There are traffic jams. Everything is going on as usual. And then our mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, would just say, you know what? close up your windows. The air quality isn't good today because of all the burning fires and stuff like that. So it's a little bit, it's an interesting place to be, Ukraine these days. But we decided to go south for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and with a young family, I cannot imagine. Have you ever been to the bomb shelters in Ukraine?
Oh yeah, we actually have a good one in my. We live not far from the Independence Square. It's right in the center of Kiev, and we have a good one because the building was constructed in the Stalin era. I think we have 2 stories down below the ground. But it's been flooded recently, so I mean, it's been renovated and stuff like that. It was another reason that we decided to move for a while. Yeah.
Well, thank you for telling us a little bit about what the daily life is like. As you can imagine, this is very important for our American friends to hear and understand that the loss of life is ongoing and terrifying. Let's switch to something a little bit happier. I'm putting in the chat a link to your novel. So you have a new novel that just came out in March. It's an American thriller that touches Ukraine in an unexpected way. And I've read the reviews, and I'm not at all surprised to hear that it's won at least something like 3 awards. And I have a list here of those awards. One is they're from different sorts of. One is the Reader's Favorite Award. Another is a Global Books Award, finalist for American Fiction Awards, and you even got an honorable mention at the San Francisco Book Festival. Yeah. Congratulations! Congratulations!
Thank you. I'm breaking them in.
Yeah, the book is in the link is in the chat. Tell us a little bit about the book, because from what I understand, there's a minor character based on Leonid Rudnytzky. He would have loved that. He would have loved that and seen it as a great honor. Tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us a little bit about the character.
Yeah. I wish I could have finished it before he passed away, because it'd be nice. Your father was a very witty fellow. He'd have fun with that, I guess.
Right, definitely would.
And right, yeah. I some 15 years ago, I had this urge to write something, and I did like a few short stories, and I envisioned them finally being put together as one book. And I remember I sent out one of those stories for publication, and it got rejected, and I figured maybe the whole thing is worthless, and I forgot all about it. And then not long ago, I almost by accident, I found a flash drive where it was saved. I looked at it, I read it, and I said, no, it couldn't be that bad, right? So I worked on it for a little bit, and then I published it, and apparently people like it, so I'm very happy.
My copy's arriving tomorrow, so I'm very very excited about this. Tell us, how did you meet Leo Rudnytzky? Where, how, when? How did y'all meet?
Well, I was his student, and I was an exchange student back then. It was early 90s, and they had this Salle Kiev University exchange program, and I believe I was the last one who was on that program. It was closed out after that. And my professor, Professor Pogrebny, he was. He was. I wrote a thesis, and he was my advisor in that, whatever it's called. And he said, listen, I mean, if you want to research a little more, I can send you to the States. I know this fellow. His name is Leonid Rudnytzky. They have this exchange student program. Why don't we put you on that? And I said, yeah, fine. America sounds exciting. And then he says to me, listen, just call him up, tell him who you are and stuff like that, but don't call him too early, because he goes to bed late at night. Make sure with the time difference and all that. So I called him, we chatted a little bit, and then I remember it was a summertime, and then Professor Pogrebny is telling me, listen, Leo Rudnytzky is actually coming to Kiev. You'll have a chance to meet him personally. And the occasion was, I believe, the Writers Union of Ukraine was giving him some sort of an award or something like that. I forgot what the exact occasion was, but it was happening at the Writers Union headquarters on Bankova Street, which is by the presidential palace. And the building itself is really beautiful. It's a 19th century mansion. It was actually seriously damaged not long ago by the bombardment, but that's another story. And he says to me, listen, just go there, meet him. Well, my visa was already in the works, so it was happening, so that you see the guy. And I went there, and there were quite a few dignitaries who got there to honor your father. One of them was Olесь Gonchar, and he was like an ultimate literary authority in Ukraine at the time. Another one was Ivan Drach. And I remember hearing them speak about your father, and I couldn't get. I had this feeling that they, to an extent, looked up to your father. I mean, they really found him to be a very profound and interesting, even though he wasn't a writer, he was a literary critic and all that. And he was, and the way they approached him and the way they talked about him, I really, he seemed to be a very, very interesting man to me. And then, and when it all ended, I finally came up to him and we talked, and he pulls out 2 quarters out of his pocket. At that time, I didn't know what they were. And he says to me, listen, when you're in New York, when you plane arrives, that's what you put into that automatic telephone. And call my friend and he'll pick you up, and then I'll pick you up in Philadelphia, and that was it. That's how I met your father, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's a great story. I'm actually, as you're speaking, I know there's photos of Professor Pochrivny and my dad, and I have a bank of photos like called up on one of my screens, and I'm trying desperately to find a picture of Professor Pochrivny, but so far no luck. So that's a lovely story. I love that. Thank you I did not know that. So thank you so much. That's a beautiful thing to share. Tell me about, you were indispensable to him when he worked on projects in Ukrainian because of your language skills, your general wisdom. He loved you. He loved working with you. He relied on you for years while you were in the United States. What was it like working with him? Was he bossy? Was he friendly? When I work with him, sometimes he's very focused and gets things done. So.
No, I never found him to be bossy whatsoever. I mean, he was, as I said, I really appreciated his sense of humor. That was something. Like the picture you showed earlier with the laurel wreath and stuff like that. There was a funny story. It was a celebration organized for him by the Ukrainian community, right? At the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Jenkintown, I believe it was. Yeah. And I remember he came to pick me up on the way to that event. All right. And we pull up to the parking lot, and we see like a good hundreds of cars, and it showed that there will be plenty of people. And he says to me, Olесь, how about we just flee? Let's abscond.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's how he was. No, it was a bliss, to be working. Yeah, we did quite a few projects, and I learned so much from him. He was a diaspora figure, but very much unlike the rest of the diaspora. The way he commanded the Ukrainian language, I mean, it was his native language, but still, he spent most of his life outside Ukraine. I mean, he was truly a man of letters. Yeah.
He was very adamant about speaking Ukrainian. His first visit to Ukraine, he was constantly, people in Ukraine were surprised that he spoke Ukrainian in the western part. But then when he was in Kiev, where most people spoke Russian, he was almost took it like a personal offense that people weren't speaking Ukrainian. I believe he got into an argument with someone in the subway.
Yeah. He wouldn't mind to pick up a fight. Yeah.
Any thoughts, memories you'd like to share in addition to this? Like, you mentioned to me when we spoke yesterday that sometimes you think about it, it comes into your thoughts. I have that too with my mentors in my life. Like, I'll be doing something and I'll remember somebody. I'm like, and just any thoughts, any memories that you'd like to share?
Well, because I mentioned him to my family now quite often, you know, like for example, there are a few phrases or jokes that I like to quote, you know, and they would say, where did you hear that? Where did you hear that expression? Like he liked to say it, "Припини варяти грати," which is, you know, it's the phrase that's used in the Western Ukraine mostly, and stuff like that. And they and people close to me begin using the same words. So your father's legacy
Oh, that's sweet.
keeps on living through me into my family and stuff like that. And there is a number of ways. I mean, funny stories, interesting stories. I do not know if you know this. We were editors on this photo album, Faith and Hope.
Yes,
Of
yes,
the Ukrainian church. It was probably the biggest project that we did with him. And it was, we spent nights and nights, you know, in front of the computer, typing it up, you know, coming up with different texts to explain what was. There was this famous Polish photographer, I think, who went to Ukraine, who took a few pictures of how the life is in Western Ukraine. I just remember there was this picture where a family would plow the field without the horse, right? And there's another picture, right? And there was another picture where they had the horse, all right? And we couldn't come up with a, you know, with a name for the picture. And he says, well, and he goes, let's do this: plowing with the horse, without the horse, right? He was, yeah, as I said, he was very witty, and so, yeah, his sense of humor is perhaps what I would, you know, remember the most.
Well, I appreciate this so much. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk.
And I remember also, he was also very straightforward, and he was a brave man. I remember he had this episode when he needed to be hospitalized not long ago, like it was 2 years ago or something like that. And people told me that, and I decided to call to check up on him. And he was back at home, I believe. And I, you know, and we talked, and I say, you know what, just come over. I mean, it's not that bad in Ukraine. I say, listen, I have some of the best bomb shelter under my house. You know, the better one only the president has, right? And there was a silence on that end of the line, and I thought he was actually considering it. So he was up to, you know, to many things. So he was a great man.
Thank you so much. You know, God bless you. I know that all of us are praying for Ukraine and doing what we can to support Ukraine. And thank you so much. I'm going to transition now from Ukraine to actually Switzerland. And you may know our next guest, Andrej Lushnycky. I
remember it. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to transition now to our next guest, and Andrej Lushnycky. Andrej's been a guest on our program, and I'm going to ask that you turn your camera on. And hello. And he's been a guest in our program in May of 2023, where he offered a brilliant analysis of what was happening in Ukraine at the time. And he is very widely published and a recognized authority on matters regarding to Ukraine. Andrej has served as Honorary Consul of Ukraine in Switzerland since 2014 and is president of the Ukrainian Society of Switzerland for the past 26 years. He is a member of the Foreign Advisory Board of the Ukrainian World Congress, widely published in Ukrainian, Swiss, and international newspapers and journals. I'm putting some of his works in the chat as well, links to some of his work, as well as some of his recent articles and frequent press appearances. Andrej, nice to see you. In addition to being a colleague in matters of Ukraine, Leonid Rudnytzky was your uncle, and very close to your father.
Absolutely, that is correct. You know, I think there was a bit of a family tradition. You had mentioned that my grandfather was like a surrogate father for him. And I think in many ways he became like a surrogate father for me when he spent his time in Europe, because we would visit regularly. We would see each other much more often than when I had lived in the US. So it was quite funny that we were able to spend so much time together.
It was the other way too, because my brother was close to your father.
Absolutely.
They've done things together.
And the running joke was that I was his European son and that, you know, he was here, and that when he was here, Nick was my dad's son, you know, so that was they like to exchange that. But absolutely true. I mean, he was a devout family man. I think what was mentioned before, probably what still remains in my memory is always, of course, his sense of humor. His ability to just laugh at everything and always to find something, or even you know, a quote in Latin or a quote in German, and in a very sort of gentlemanly way, he would always attribute it to somebody else. Like, to your grandmother, she would say this in Latin about old age as a sickness in and of itself, you know. He would always, you know, he would never take the credit for it. He would always attribute it to somebody else. Just very gracious in that sense. And I think that's probably something that's, well, probably that's certainly something that's missing today in many parts of the world, and certainly missing in the, you know, what's happening in the United States. So I think he is sorely missed. I often remember, I don't know if you remember this, but at the entrance to his door at the office at La Salle, it was always written, "Enter all ye who dare." You know, the quote from,
or something. It's a Dante.
exactly, from Dante's Inferno, you know. And it's funny because people always took it sort of as like a serious warning, but I always kind of found it more of a taunting welcome. That was really his style. You know, he had this very, I mean, he was an imposing man. He was very tall, a very deep, booming voice. He would speak and the windows would rattle in Olney Hall, or what's it called now, Haywood Hall or something. But at the same time, you know, I think we say that, or people say that you can judge a person's true character when you see how they treat people where they have nothing to gain from them.
Yes.
And I mean, I think your father probably spent as much time talking to the security guards at La Salle College, La Salle University, to the ladies in the cafeteria, as he did talking to his colleagues. You know, he was just honest to goodness, interested in people, and he was always trying to look for the goodness in people and give an example. And I thought that was, for me as a young student, and of course his nephew, that was always something that I found extremely impressive, that he was able to communicate with everybody. And everybody communicated with him, connected with him as he was walking through the campus at La Salle or any place else. It was always, "Hey, Dr. Rudnytzky, how are you?" And he would always had a kind word to say and ask how that person's wife was, or how that person's, you know, son was, or somebody who was having difficulty in their lives. And that was very inspirational for a young person. To see this, and just to see how decent you could be to other people, and how being decent to others often made them, you know, be more decent to you and to people around you. So I thought that was a very impressive kind of way to grow up and to have this contact with him. But you know, we had a lot of good experiences either at La Salle, and I think I have a notebook full of quotes of funny experiences that happened. I believe you do too, and I believe your brother does as well, of all these quotes with him and his meetings with Professor Miroslav Labunka, and of course his most trusted partner of all was Bernie Blumenthal. I mean, I remember he was devastated when Bernie passed away because it was probably his closest friend that really truly understood him. And they really got on extremely well, both just devoted to German literature, devoted to just real intellectuals, both of them. And I think Germany, and Bernie was also writing his own poetry for a very long time as well in German.
And they were very different. They were very different people. Dr. Blumenthal was a very incredibly ethical. You always know him as well. Incredibly ethical, good person, but an avowed atheist. But a profoundly good human. As you say, he was himself a poet, a creative writer. My father was not a creative writer and a very devout Catholic. There were so many things that they were different, and yet their friendship was so deep and long abiding.
But I think that was what was great about your father, was he didn't judge people whether they were devout Catholics or Christians or not, or they, you know, he just liked good people, and he surrounded himself with good people, and he was able to draw them. He was like a magnet to draw good people to himself. I think that was something that was very, very impressive for me, or in fact, inspirational is probably a better word, was that he was able to, you know, have so many people. And if you look at the number of students of his that went on to have, you know, not just successful careers, but who were able to just take on positions of prominence in society, and have also in some ways emulated how he treated them. I mean, your father was a true devout humanist. You know, he really believed in people. He believed in values. He had a belief system, but at the same time, he was not judgmental. he wouldn't cross somebody off of his Christmas card list. I don't know if he had a Christmas card list, but he wouldn't cross them off because at one point, they had some kind of misunderstanding or tough or something like that. He always tried to really find, common language with people. And it was usually about things that they were able to agree upon, and that eventually allowed them to be less, argumentative in that sense. But I mean, if I think of, for example, some of his colleagues at La Salle, where he took great joy, but it was joy in a very sort of innocent way of kind of needling them, but at the same time, it was never meant to do any harm. It was always, in a sense, a way of trying to show his sort of empathy or his sort of respect for somebody, or I don't know. I thought that was
his way of including someone. His way of including. Yeah,
someone. It was his way of including somebody. So that was, I think, a very important aspect of that.
But Alex, do you also remember Dr. Blumenthal and Leonid Rudnytzky's dynamic and friendship? Feel free to jump in if you'd like to come back into the conversation.
Oh, no, Andrej is doing great. Yeah, I remember Dr. Blumenthal. It was, they were, at the first glance, they weren't much alike. Dr. Blumenthal was very soft-spoken. Your father was more
loud.
right, yeah. It was, but he, the way, it was almost like with his stature, with his charisma, he could overshadow Dr. Blumenthal. But your father always did the best not to. All right.
I actually
Dr.
remember
Blumenthal
that.
was the head of the department. There was, everybody was, he was very respectful of that. And their friendship was, I remember Dr. Blumenthal would come to your house. I mean, he didn't live that far as I remember, right?
Yeah. I think what we're talking about is civil discourse in society and in academia, which largely is hard to find these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I really appreciated, some of the sort of the war stories. They would meet on Friday at the end of the day, and they would have a drink of cognac or something, and they would exchange all the funny stories of the week. And some of them just went on to legend. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this here, if I can say it, allow me, Katya, but there was this funny moment when Miroslav Lubunka came back.
I love this story. And this is a great story for our Ukrainian community. So Miroslav Lubunka is well known in Western Ukraine. So our Ukrainian viewers will appreciate the family. God rest his soul. He's been gone for a while. But the Ukrainian American community in Philadelphia will love this story. So please do tell it. I know this story is a great story.
This was one of these Friday afternoons. They were sitting having a cognac, and Miroslav had just come back from the Fulbright. He had been to Moscow, and he had come back, and Miroslav Lubunka had a very good command of the English language. He just never mastered idioms, and he had a very, very strong and pronounced accent.
He was older. He was a little bit older. The generation was about 10 years older than my father. Yeah.
Exactly. And he came back, and I remember they were sitting talking, and he said, and I'll mimic his very thick accent, he said, nobody in Moscow believed I was an American. So and Bernie Blumenthal looks at him and says, Miroslav, nobody here believes you're an American.
Oh, that's great.
And it was just this classic moment, that they really, but it just showed this mutual respect. And I think, one of my fondest memories, I would visit your father very often when he was rector of the University of Munich, even when he was dean at the Ukrainian University in Munich. And I remember I would drive from Fribourg to Munich. It was about a 5-hour drive. And I would come back on Sunday night. It was the weekend thing. We'd go up there once a month. I'd go up, we'd go out, we'd have a good time. We'd meet with people and have dinner. But I remember I would be driving back. And I think the one thing I remember is I've been laughing so much the whole weekend that my jaw hurt. I was driving after 5 hours alone, and you were just laughing all the time. And we had this sort of rapport, that you would do. For example, we'd always have these little games we played. One of them was, I would say, okay, he would say, okay, good enough. That was his expression, good enough. And I would always say, Boris, and he started laughing because Boris good enough, that was our, so we had all these little like quirky sayings we had, that we would do. But I think his sense of humor was probably a direct I mean, it was natural for him, but also it was probably the fact that he had lived a very difficult life. And if you would allow me, I'd like to speak maybe about one time that he and I traveled up to Weimar.
Oh, I would love, yes, I think, do we have a photo of this? Is this one of the photos? Do we have a photo?
No, that's another. I had sent you another photo of us going to another memorial that was there for Ukrainian soldiers in World War One. But your father and I decided we were going to go to Weimar. He was a Germanist. He loved Goethe. Goethe was for him, the absolute greatest writer in German literature. And so we decided to go up there. And as we went up there, he said, as a boy, I had to, when we arrived in Germany during the war, I had to hide here. He said, maybe we can go and try to find the place. And I said, sure. So we took the car, we drove, and we found this place. It was called Grüningen bei Greußen, a little village. And we went to the church, the St. Petri Church or something, as we're driving through. He goes, wait, stop here. And he saw the church. He said, that's it. And we got out of the car and we parked and we walked up to the church, and he started walking just silently. I mean, he was not a man of silence. He always had something to say. Yeah. He started walking silently, and I could see he was physically, afraid. His lips were trembling, and he was walking, and we were able to find the gravestone where he hid as a little boy, as the Nazi soldiers were looking for them. And your grandmother was actually hiding in the confessional inside the church. And we went in there, and it was probably the longest period of silence I've ever had with your father, maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And we just knelt down and prayed. And I think he just prayed for the mercy of God that he was able to survive that moment, and the fact that he had this incredible life after that moment. It was a very, very moving situation to be in. And I had never seen your father be afraid. I'd never seen your father, be speechless. And that very much impacted me. And that's something that we were able to share. I tried to look for photos. I think this was before digital cameras, so the photos I have are somewhere in a closet. I need to look them up, but I will look them up and find them. And I'd like to go back. And then we went, of course, to Weimar, and this was just, this was the late 1990s. And we went around, and it was, again, in typical form. We took a tour. We went to visit all these places where Goethe and Schiller were and so forth. And, the guide would say one of these quotes, like a 3 or 4 line or 1 paragraph quote of Goethe, and your father would continue at the next page, because he had this all memorized. He knew it all by heart. So no, it was really, I think, probably what really I enjoyed the most about being with him was, of course, the family connection, but it was one of truly a few people in my life that I can say that every moment with him felt like you were learning something.
Wow.
And
That's a beautiful tribute. That's a beautiful thing to say.
And not in a you felt like you were actually part of history, living something. And you were almost tempted to take out a notebook and write down all these things. And now I kind of regret, because I don't remember all of it. But I regret that I didn't do that. But we had these conversations, and that's something I think that showed how he was a true pedagogue by nature. He was able to lead people, to show them and bring them to knowledge, and people did it without, it was almost effortless on his part.
Oh, wow. I have some photos I'm going to share, and if you care to comment on this, and what you're saying, I think every teacher dreams to be remembered the way you are speaking about him. And thank you so much for that. And thank you for that story of the cemetery. I actually did not know that until you'd shared it with me after his death. Do you all see the screen right now? Does it say Andrej Lushnycky?
I don't see anything.
Okay, so I've made a mistake. I'm going to go ahead and share again. Oh, here we go. All right, this should work. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got some photos here that I'm asking you to sort of comment on. The first one here is, this is pretty obvious. It's Leonid Rudnytzky surrounded by his cousins, Kateryna, and then your father, Alexander.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
they were inseparable. I mean, they had. It's probably one of the few people I know that had daily phone calls, and sometimes several times a day. They were calling each other about one thing or another, and they really were brother and sister, despite the fact that he was a first cousin. But there was just complete and absolute love and I think admiration, which doesn't happen often. The two together. You know, you can love your sibling, but you may not be in admiration of them. But they really were in admiration of each other.
They were. I'm almost afraid to say this to you because I think this will hit you as hard as it hits me. But in his last months, he would say "Oiko Klitschik," which Alex is calling me. So
no, and I mean, I think you recall this as well. I mean, as a little boy, and I remember we would be at the house at Lindley, and all I remember, I wouldn't get the conversation because they were talking about things, but all I remember was this infectious laughter coming from your father and my father. This,
yeah,
they were laughing the whole time.
Yeah,
it was. And we didn't know what they were laughing about, but of course you began laughing too because they were laughing. The adults were laughing, so it had to be funny.
Here is a picture of I suspect one of the visits.
Okay, I'll give you a little inside peek into how we function when we went to conferences together. This is actually in Urbana-Champaign at the conference, and the person I'm in the middle. To the right is of course Leonid Rudnytzky, and to my left is Hans-Jürgen Doss, who was a German senator, who your father, interestingly, he called me about a day before I was flying out. He said, "When are you getting into Chicago?" Because I was flying in from Switzerland. I said, "I'm getting in, tomorrow." He said, "Oh, good. Can you pick up this person the next day?" I said, "Well, I really wasn't planning on staying overnight. I was going to come directly, but sure, of course, I'll pick him up." So I picked up Hans-Jürgen Doss, who, by the way, is a very good friend of Merz, who's the leader of Germany today, and of course with Angela Merkel, he's a very influential person. And I have to say, when I called him, Katya, to tell him that your father died, he cried for probably 5 minutes on the phone. He really was so taken aback by your father's death. He really, really enjoyed it. But the funny story here is that that's actually at Murphy's Pub or Murphy's Bar in Urbana-Champaign. And so I had introduced your father and Hans-Jürgen, I corrupted them. I introduced them to Long Island iced teas.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's what we're drinking right there. Those are Long Island iced teas. And I saw that they had a happy hour that started at 4:00. And so the next day, as we're sitting at this conference all day, we're sitting there, and I told Hans-Jürgen, we have to go back for Long Island iced teas. It's happy hour. And at about 4:00, he leans over to me and he says in a pretty loud voice, not too loud, trying to be discreet, he says, "Andrej, it's tea time."
Oh my goodness.
I said, yes, it's tea time. And so everybody looks at us saying, "Oh, these civilized Europeans are going to go drink tea now." Of course, we left the conference to go have Long Island iced teas at happy hour at Murphy's Pub, and your dad stuck in there with us too. So there you go. So that was a very funny way to tell you how he had this joie de vivre. He really loved life, and he loved sharing with people that were important to him.
Well, I'm actually calling up some photos of Mr. Doss, Hans-Jürgen Doss, and I'm going to stop sharing this and kind of go to another, just to punctuate the story, because that was a very good friendship that meant a lot to him. We're going to cover his interactions with public figures on next week, but here's a picture of him, this Hans-Jürgen Doss, and I believe that's Helmut Kohl.
It is Helmut Kohl, yes. Helmut Kohl got an honorary doctorate, I believe, from the Ukrainian Free University. And that's when they went to meet him. And of course, he was CDU. Hans-Jürgen Doss was CSU, CDU. So he was CDU, but also, and he was able to initiate the contacts. And so they met.
And they helped a lot with the Ukrainian Free University, which kind of ties into the larger theme of what we're talking about. I don't know if you can see, because this is quite small, but here's another picture of, I think, Hans-Jürgen Doss and Leonid Rudnytzky. And then I believe the one below that is with, I think it's Angela Merkel, maybe.
I can't see it.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious, I'm just making a mess out of it. I'm going to paste it here and see if we can enlarge it. Mr. Doss was a very supportive of the Ukrainian community. He
still is, by the way. He still is. I'm still in contact with him. He still sponsors. Heavily injured children to come from Ukraine to Germany to get operated on, and he pays all of these costs out of pocket.
Wow.
I mean, he's really incredible.
Yeah, there he is. Next time, that's Angela Merkel. So, and he was the one who. So this is a great example of how people were so kind to respond to my father, and to affect good elsewhere. It's just it's beautiful how people treat other people well, to continue to promote more good in the world. I'm going to go back to the photos here with you. So this is Urbana-Champaign, and you actually presented at that conference many times.
I did.
Very successfully. I remember being very impressed by your presentations. So here we have another.
Well, I'll be honest. This is another picture. Okay, so that is in, I believe it's Cheltenham. It's at the Austrian village. Now, if you see behind you, there's a Ukrainian trident, the trizub on the wall there. That's the same table that your father and my grandfather would go to have Austrian beer at, German beer at the Austrian village, because this was part of the Habsburg. They had the Ukrainian trident for Galicia, for Halachina. And so this is the same table. We continued this tradition. When my grandfather died a few years later, your dad and I would go to have a beer and have lunch at the Austrian village, sitting at the same table he sat with my grandfather.
Wow.
And every so often, your brother would join, and our cousin Danya would join, and my father would join too. But that was our yearly sort of summer getaway. We'd go there, and we always took a picture under this trizub, which was it's still hanging there, by the way. Huh? So if you go to the Austrian village.
In this photo, you are making everybody laugh hysterically. What's going on here?
I'm just mimicking your father. I'm following his footsteps. I would always, I had this little tradition that whenever I had a conference, or whenever I had, this is a very personal story, but whenever I had a conference or whenever I had something, I mean, for example, we founded something at the Swiss Parliament called Ukraine Forum. We do 2 Ukrainian days a year where we have parliamentarians flying in from Ukraine, or parliamentarians from Switzerland here, and other experts coming in. And so, I basically learned how to do my public speaking by watching your father do it. And so I would always call him and thank him after it happened. And so I think here, this was just me making some kind of a joke, like he would make usually when he was making a comment. And so he was laughing, but I don't recall the exact joke of it.
Where are we here?
We're much younger here.
Yeah.
But this was in Germany. I think this is outside of Ulm. There's this Ukrainian monument for the Ukrainian soldiers who passed away in the First World War. And so your father and we'd do these trips. I'd meet him in Munich. I'd pick him up in Munich, and we'd drive to different places in Germany. And he had a cousin who lived in Ulm as well, who was a doctor. I'm trying to remember his name. And so we would visit, and on the way, if there was anything Ukrainian, we would always stop somewhere and just check it out. So this was somewhere, I forget the exact address. Okay, so that's Mykola Zhulinsky.
Oh, wow.
Alex, you must know Mykola, who obviously headed the Institute for Taras Shevchenko, who was a minister of culture, I believe, as well.
I believe he was vice prime minister.
And vice prime minister as well. Yeah, exactly.
Something like that, right.
So I know him as a literary figure. I know him as a literary, is that right?
And
I know him as a poet.
President Kravchuk. Yeah, he's still alive. His father lived actually in Hunter, New York. His father lived to be like 96 years old. But here they both came for a conference I organized at the University of Freiburg, and with Mykola. And so we just took, a picture. But he also was very helpful because we had temporarily had an office in Kyiv at his institute. I think it's the Institute of Shevchenko or something, where we would go and see him. And your father got along very well with him, and so obviously by extension he was very nice to me, and it would always help. And Mykola, to his honor, he was the person who put up the first monument to the Holodomor in Ukraine, which was the small monument that was standing in front of the St. Michael's Church. That was his work. So very, very interesting person and an intellectual in terms of the literary world. I haven't seen him in some years, but whenever I would go to Kyiv, I would see him, and we would always speak. In Freiburg, it was very funny because we've had more than 20 or 25 almost conferences about Ukraine before Ukraine was trendy. And your father came to several of them. We had one on, in fact, we've had several former presidents there. President Kravchuk came as well for the 10th anniversary of Ukrainian independence. Your father came for one on Shevchenko. We had another one here on Ukraine and literature. So we had several of them. And that's what that is.
That's wonderful. The work you guys do, continuing Ukraine's presence in the diaspora. That's fantastic. What's going on here?
That's not my picture, but that is his portrait. I mean, that's his bust. And it's actually funny because that bust is in my office at the university. And there's a funny story to that, in that your father asked me to get it because they were selling the Ukrainian Free University building on Pinzanauer Strasse in Munich. And your father said, "Can you take something back for me to Switzerland?" I said, "Okay." Well, he goes, "Well, when you get there, they'll give it to you." And so, of course, I said, you can't say no to family. Meanwhile, I think I had brought back several hundred boxes of books to New York from Munich, all these things. Every time we traveled, we had 1 or 2 boxes of books that were checked in as bags and so forth. And so that actually, in the middle there, that's his bust. And it was very funny because we were driving back and I had a document. Obviously, it weighs something like 50 or 60 pounds, it's super heavy. And I was driving back with that in the car and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I can't, I'm going to have problems at the border, leaving Germany, going to Switzerland. So I was with a colleague of mine and we said, okay, let's have some fun with this. So we put it in the back seat, we put the seatbelt on and we put a hat on it.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And would you believe they waved us through? So
oh my God.
That actually entered into Switzerland with a hat on, a fedora hat like your father wore, and it was with a seatbelt in the backseat of my car. I think the statute of limitations is over at this point. I don't think I should have any concern about the Swiss authorities coming after me at this point.
Taking a risk there. I love this next picture that you sent me because it shows, look, it shows my father looking at my mother. Oh, yeah. And like, this is a new one for me. I'd never seen this picture before. And that's pretty much how he feels about her. And I'm so lucky and blessed. And I think like a lot of our family is to grow up in a household with a mother and father who loved each other and loved us. And so I really appreciate you sharing this photo.
That was our wedding, actually. They came to our wedding. And so that was at the wedding that the photographer grabbed the picture. So
she looks beautiful and he looks in love. So what more could you ask for?
I have more I'll share. So
thank you. So I have, I know you guys went to Oktoberfest. You have all sorts of, thank you for sharing the memories you shared. Any closing thoughts before I transition to Mark Thomas?
No, I mean, I think just what really impacted me was always just his graciousness. I had written something, I was hoping to publish something in his Festschrift, but I think we ran out of time and didn't get it done. But I think just the idea of being gracious. I mean, he was a real, not just a mensch, but he was a real kind of an aristocrat in that sense. I think, with his demeanor, with his, respect for people, it was very inspirational to grow up like that. It's a little bit like, some similarity, not much, but if you've ever seen this film, the Wes Anderson movie, The Grand Budapest Hotel, if you've ever seen this, and there's this line at the end where he says something like, I think he had sort of, he was living in a time that no longer was.
Yes.
And I think in that sense, I forget the exact quote, I'll send it to you in the chat, but and that's exactly what your father was like. He could have been in the 19th century. He could have been in the 18th century. He was in the 20th century, just by chance. But the way he acted was sort of, timeless, just very classy. And I really loved him. There's only one thing I never really understood about him, and maybe you can clarify this one day. He loved literature. He loved poetry. But the one thing he never really liked or never got into, where he was very different from my father, was he wasn't big into music.
That's true. Yes.
And I never quite understood that. Because music is what's the expression Yehudi Menuhin said, music expresses things that words cannot, and I think I'm surprised that your father never really got into music, but maybe it was just a consequence of never really having a permanent home until he was older and he moved in with your mother, that he didn't have this. Because my father, his escape was always music. He loved, from rock and roll to country and western to the blues to all of these things. Your father was more Frank Sinatra. He would enjoy Frank Sinatra, but he was never really into sort of the whole musical thing, which I thought fascinating because, he loved he would teach about, the Apollonian theory of art, about the Dionysian theory of art. He would teach about all this. And for me, there's no better example of the Dionysian theory of art than like the whole 1960s and 70s music scene, that art, suffering brings out great music, with all these artists suffering and taking all of these drugs and things like that, Not that I'm, encouraging that, but I always found that to be a little bit fascinating on his side. But otherwise,
I remember him now talking about Vera Lynn, but I believe
Sure.
that's a singer from, I don't know.
English singer, yeah, during the war they would play, yeah. There's even a song by Pink Floyd. Does anybody here remember Vera Lynn? It's on the album The Wall, talking about how, The Wall is a tribute album to Roger Waters' father who was killed. He was a pilot in the war. He was killed in the Royal Air Force. And all he got was a letter from King George, saying, thank you for your service. And Vera Lynn was one of the artists that they promoted to make them feel more patriotic and be supportive of the war. So maybe that was something. Perhaps it was the war that just sort of destroyed his belief in this sort of superficial innocence of people, and that through music everybody would get along. I don't know. I've never quite figured it out. I will continue pondering it. So how's that?
That's great, actually. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you both. Thank you both, Alex. Thank you, Andrej, very much for sharing your memories with us. I'm going to introduce Mark Thomas now, and Mark actually wasn't able to be here, so we have a pre-taped segment. And as I go into it, I'm going to share a couple photographs just to sort of prep what you're going to see in the short video. So here's Dr. Mark Thomas, and he is here with Leonid Rudnytzky in 2016. This is shortly after he came back from a deployment in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and Poland. Mark Thomas is an assistant professor and chair of political science at Salle University in Philadelphia. His areas of expertise include Central East Europe and Central Asia and the Russian Federation in U.S. national security affairs and cyber policy. He's been on our program, I believe, at least 3 times with really good commentary and analysis. Mark is also a decorated veteran with multiple deployments and a senior intelligence analyst, and he has pre-taped his top memories of Leonid Rudnytzky. And before I show that, I want to introduce a few photos because you'll hear him talk about the Fulbright Scholarship. So here is, and I believe Alex, you actually just said something about the Fulbright Scholarship as well. This is Senator James William Fulbright here in the middle. My father was very insistent on different parts of the world coming together and learning from one another, people meeting one another as a path to peace and mutual understanding. The other person in the photograph is Bernie Blumenthal, about whom we spoke earlier today, one of my father's closest friends and his department chair. And so that's this photo. In the video that we'll look at in just a second, you'll hear Mark Thomas refer to Alex Opanasiuk, and our own Alex Opanasiuk just mentioned Alex Opanasiuk as well. Oh, no, sorry, that was, or I don't know if it was Andrej, but we just heard about Alex Opanasiuk. Alex Opanasiuk is the premier Ukrainian novelist. He and my father became very, very close. The families actually became very close. And when I stop sharing, I'll hold up a copy of the cathedral, as well as another work that Mark Thomas is going to mention as he goes along. And then finally, you'll see Mark Thomas's office is a mess. And in the video, I tease him about it. And then Andrej has sent this. And this is a pretty good, pretty representative image of Leonid Rudnytzky's filing system and the value he attributed to ordinary stuff like that. And finally, actually, there's also, after my interview with Mark, he sent me Leo Rudnytzky's teaching philosophy, and it's just something incredibly sweet and very much consistent with his personality. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hold up the cathedral. This is if you want to understand Soviet Ukrainian life, this is the book to read. This is Alex Opanasiuk, The Cathedral. It was translated by Leonid Rudnytzky and Yuri Tkach. An amazing book. You'll hear Mark Thomas refer to it. He also refers to Mykola Rudenko's The Cross And this is another work that was translated by Raman Tachin and then Leonid Rudnytzky's introduction to it. These are two core texts that he taught as often as he could. With that said, The Big Risk, we have a short video interview with Mark Thomas. And I'm going to do my best not to mess this up. Oops, I already messed this up. One more try. All right, fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Mark, for making time to talk to us and share your memories about Leo Rudnytzky. You've known him for the better part of your life. You met him back in 1981, 44 years ago. And over the decades, you became essentially a son to him. Tell us a little bit about first meeting him.
Yeah, it was back in September of '81, right after Labor Day. My foster father took me over to the office to show me where it was and walked in, took me up to Dr. Rudnytzky's door and said, "This kid's your problem," and then walked out the door, left me with Dr. Rudnytzky, who essentially took me under his wing at that point. He taught me German literature and English the first year, and then German language, eventually Russian, Ukrainian literature, and then we did German language literature in German. He eventually sponsored me for a Fulbright, wrote me a recommendation for grad school, actually twice, once for Notre Dame, once for my MBA program. So yeah.
Did you get the Fulbright?
I did. I ended up in Frankfurt. And if you get the Festschrift or see the Festschrift, the article I have in there is based on the research I did 1988 on paper.
We do not hear sound.
Hey, did I just hear you say you don't hear the sound?
It's
There was
breaking
no
up.
sound. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't.
Oh,
It's breaking up.
oh, it's a shame.
Is there a link you could send in the chat for that, Katya?
I can do my best. I tried yes, I can do that. They go on to, I don't know what you all have heard so far, but it's not where it's definitely I can figure out how to do it in the link, and I will do that. It's a very sweet conversation. We're making fun of Mark's office, and Mark is talking about how, as an educator, we educate the whole person, not just see them as a student. And he goes into several stories in which he catches himself acting like Leo Rudnytzky in the classroom or in his interaction or his investment in students. He talks about the importance of education in keeping Ukraine prominence in or making Ukraine prominent in the American consciousness, so that when this horrible war starts, people know who Ukrainians are. He talks about the role of literature, how important literature is to keeping a culture alive, to the soul of a culture alive, and then share some personal stories. But I will definitely put a link in the chat, and I think we are actually quite over time as it is. So this is
Can I just add that quote, Katya, about that I said that I wanted that made me think of your father. Have you seen the film Grand Budapest Hotel?
I've seen excerpts of it, but I don't recall the whole start to finish.
Well, there are two quotes that whenever I watch it, I love the film. I've watched it with students and so forth. But let me just say the two quotes. And I think one that reminded me of your father was when he talks about the writer and talks about the man who inherited the hotel. He says, I think his world ended long before he even entered it. Although I must say, he certainly maintained the illusion with a marvelous grace.
Wow, that's a great quote. That is.
And another one is that there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric, slaughterhouse that once was known as humanity. He was one of them. What more is there to say?
Oh,
I think
wow.
these are the two quotes that make me think of your father whenever we'll watch the movie.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. That's really beautiful. Thank you very much. And I think this is not one of those shows where we actually need questions, right? I mean, this is I'm very grateful to my colleagues for making space for this remembrance. I didn't know how it was going to go, how I was going to feel about it, but I'm very grateful to you all very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Kateryna and Pan Andrej and Pan Alex. We are over time, but we do have, of course, time for questions if someone wishes to ask or comment. We will hope to continue into next week, same time, with more memories.
And
Please,
the focus next week will be on his role in the Ukrainian Catholic Church, his relationship with Patriarch Yosef CP, and some more of international figures and American politics.
Thank you, Kateryna. Any questions or comments, please? Yes, we haven't chat this quote.
It's the quote that Andrej Lushnycky read, which is really great.
Yes.
And here's the other quote. And I am ready to do the closing part if we're ready for the closing part. All right, then I'm going to do our closing comments. Yes.
Please do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.
Дякую, Катю. Дякую всім.